She was a romance novelist who knew how to craft a compelling murder. But when her own husband turned up dead, investigators discovered fiction had become reality. This is the chilling true story of Nancy Brophy, who once wrote How to Murder Your Husband, and then stood trial for doing just that.
Nancy Crampton Brophy lived in Portland, Oregon, and had carved out a quiet life writing romantic suspense novels. She was known for her books about strong women, forbidden love, and occasionally, revenge. She met Daniel Brophy, a kind and intelligent chef who taught at the Oregon Culinary Institute. They fell in love, married, and built a modest but steady life, focused on food and fiction. Daniel was beloved by students, known for his gentle demeanor and quirky humor. He loved his work and had no known enemies, living with a sense of calm simplicity. Nancy supported his career and spent her time self-publishing novels. She wasn't a bestseller, but she had a loyal niche audience. Her writing often featured dangerous love stories, ones with affairs, deceit, and sometimes murder. She even dabbled in blog posts, writing about how to kill off fictional characters realistically. But one essay, posted years earlier, stood out more than others. Titled How to Murder Your Husband, it read like a checklist of dark intentions. In the post, Nancy jokingly outlined motives for spousal murder insurance, infidelity, and emotional distance. She discussed methods, alibis, and even how to avoid detection, though she claimed it was purely theoretical. At the time, no one thought much of it. It was a piece of dark humor, a writer's imagination running wild. Behind the scenes, however, things in her marriage weren't as idyllic as they seemed. Nancy and Daniel were facing financial difficulties that strained their relationship. They had multiple insurance policies in Daniel's name, policies that would be quite valuable if he died. Some friends noticed Nancy becoming more distant, focused, and oddly secretive. Still, no one suspected danger, until a quiet Saturday morning shattered everything. On June 2, 2018, Daniel Brophy arrived at the Oregon Culinary Institute to prepare for a weekend class. He unlocked the kitchen early, as usual, never suspecting he was walking into a trap. Later that morning, students arrived to find him lying on the floor unmoving, unresponsive. He had been shot twice, once in the back and once in the chest. There were no signs of a struggle, no theft, and no witnesses. Police quickly ruled out robbery and began to consider a targeted act. Nancy showed up at the scene after hearing the news and was seen comforting others. She appeared stunned, devastated, but not entirely emotional. In the coming days, she posted tributes to Daniel on Facebook. She spoke of her love for him and how she couldn't imagine life without him. At first, the community rallied around her. She was the grieving widow of a beloved teacher, but detectives weren't fully convinced. They looked into the couple's background and noticed some troubling inconsistencies. They learned about the life insurance policies Nancy had taken out, totaling nearly $1.5 million. They discovered financial hardship, including unpaid mortgages and mounting debt. Then they found the essay, How to Murder Your Husband. Suddenly, fiction began to look like premeditation. Investigators obtained surveillance footage from the area around the institute. In a chilling discovery, they saw Nancy's vehicle in the vicinity during the time of the murder. Nancy had told police she was home the entire morning. The video contradicted her story and raised serious questions. Further digging revealed online purchases of gun parts. Linked to Nancy. She had bought a ghost gun slide and barrel that could be swapped into a standard pistol, though the actual murder weapon was never found. Experts believed it had been dismantled. The parts were consistent with what she had ordered online. The mounting circumstantial evidence painted a grim picture. Nancy was no longer just a grieving wife. She had become the prime suspect in her own husband's killing. Nancy Brophy was arrested in September 2018, just over 3 months after Daniel's murder. The news stunned their friends and the local writing community. Charged with second-degree murder, Nancy maintained her innocence. She claimed she had nothing to do with her husband's death. As she awaited trial, the media began digging into every corner of her past. Reporters discovered her essay on murdering husbands and her history of romantic crime fiction. Headlines around the country blared with irony. Writer of How to Murder Your Husband charged with husband's murder. The case practically wrote itself, and America was captivated. In May 2022, Nancy's trial finally began. Prosecutors laid out their case carefully, brick by brick. They described her financial motive, her lies about her whereabouts, and her gun part purchases. They said she had planned the murder meticulously and carried it out with chilling resolve. Nancy's defense team pushed back hard. They argued the evidence was all circumstantial and lacked direct proof. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitness, no confession, just inferences, they said, and a prejudiced narrative crafted by the media. But the jury listened closely to the surveillance footage, the insurance evidence, and the online trail. They saw a woman who wrote about murder and may have used her own words as a blueprint. When Nancy took the stand in her own defense, she came across as calm and articulate. She said she loved Daniel deeply and was devastated by his loss. But prosecutors highlighted inconsistencies in her story. They asked, why lie about her location if she had nothing to hide? The essay, while not allowed as direct evidence of guilt, hung over the courtroom like a shadow. Even the judge acknowledged its relevance to motive and mindset. After weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and closing arguments, the jury returned with a verdict. In May 2022, Nancy Brophy was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the decision was read. Nancy showed little reaction, quietly absorbing the weight of the judgment. At sentencing, the judge ordered her to serve life in prison. She would be eligible for parole after 25 years when she would be 91. The trial closed, but the fascination continued. News outlets published think pieces, true crime podcasts dissected her motives, and YouTubers recreated the courtroom drama. For many, it was the ultimate case of life imitating art. A romance writer writing her most tragic chapter, one that could never be undone. Daniel Brophy's family expressed relief but also sadness. They had lost a kind and loving man who simply showed up to work that morning. They remembered Daniel is more than a victim. He was a friend, a mentor, and a good soul. Their grief was deepened by the betrayal at the heart of it. Nancy continues to insist on her innocence. She says the justice system failed her, and that she is not the monster painted by prosecutors. Her appeal is ongoing, but legal experts say the evidence is unlikely to be overturned. Her own words, her actions, and her cold planning make a strong case for conviction. As time passes, the shock of the case lingers. People still ask, did a writer of murder fiction simply get too close to her subject? Nancy Brophy once used fiction to explore the darkest parts of human desire. Now she lives behind bars, a central character in a true story that shocked the world. She told readers that killing a husband was only fiction, but Daniel Brophy's death told another story, one soaked not in ink, but in reality.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're plunging into stories that are fascinating, complex, and sometimes, well, just truly astonishing. Today, we're tackling a story that honestly feels like it's ripped straight from a novel, a dark one. It's about the chilling irony, really, of what happens when a writer's darkest fiction seems to bleed into reality. We're going to be exploring the case of Nancy Crampton Brophy. She was a romantic suspense novelist based in Portland, Oregon, known for writing about strong women, forbidden love, and, often revenge. Her husband, Daniel Brophy, was in many ways quite different, a kind, intelligent chef taught at the Oregon Culinary Institute.
Right, and apparently beloved by his students, known for being gentle, having this sort of quirky humor.
Exactly. So on the surface, you have this picture of a modest life, steady, focused on, food and fiction. But here's where it gets unsettling. Nancy had this particular literary interest. Her novels often explored these dangerous love stories, affairs, deceit, murder, that kind of thing. And then there's the detail that just hangs over everything now. Years before, Nancy wrote an essay.
The essay, How to Murder Your Husband.
Right. Which, at the time, people saw as just dark humor. A writer pushing boundaries, maybe.
Just imagination running wild, yeah. But that's exactly what makes this case so compelling, and that's our mission for this deep dive. We need to sift through the sources, unpack how this piece of dark fiction may be seen as a macabre thought experiment initially, how it seemingly became this chilling blueprint for a real tragedy.
And what does it tell us about those lines between art and reality?
Exactly. How blurred they can become and how quickly things can change when circumstances, align in these awful ways.
Okay, so let's start peeling back those layers. Nancy Crampton Brophy. She wasn't a household name, right? But the sources say she had a following.
Yeah, a loyal niche audience. Self-published romantic suspense. Her books often had these really dramatic, high-stakes relationships.
And often violent endings.
Frequently, yes. Violence was definitely a theme.
In that essay, How to Murder Your Husband, it wasn't just the title, was it? The content itself was detailed.
Startlingly specific. It jokingly outlined motives for killing a spouse.
Like what?
Things like insurance money, affairs, maybe just feeling emotionally distant. It even talked about methods, alibis, how to avoid getting caught.
Wow.
And like you said, initially it was seen as theoretical, maybe dark humor for a writing group or something.
Yeah.
But looking back, that level of detail is pretty unsettling.
It definitely paints a picture of someone who understood plot mechanics, maybe too well. Now, you mentioned their quiet life.
Yeah.
Seemingly stable. But what did the sources reveal about the reality behind that? Were there cracks appearing?
There certainly were. Investigators later uncovered pretty significant financial problems.
Running troubles.
Serious money troubles. The sources detail mounting debt, unpaid mortgages.
Yeah.
It was clearly straining their relationship.
Yeah.
And this financial pressure, it becomes a really crucial element later on, and maybe the most critical piece.
Yeah.
Investigators found multiple life insurance policies in Daniel's name,
How much?
totaling nearly $1.5 million.
Wow. Policies that obviously pay out upon his death.
Precisely. So that financial desperation, the sources suggest, was really hitting a critical point.
Those hidden pressures. They can change everything. Now, nobody suspected danger at the time, but looking back, did friends or family notice any changes in Nancy's behavior beforehand?
The sources do indicate some subtle shifts, yeah. Friends mentioned she seemed a bit more distant, maybe, more focused, weirdly secretive sometimes.
Was anything alarming?
Nothing overtly alarming, no.
Yeah.
Just subtle changes. But, in hindsight, those little observations take on this chilling new meaning, don't they?
Definitely makes you wonder. It's often those subtle things. What struck me reading the sources was just how ordinary the day itself seemed. June 2nd, 2018, a quiet Saturday morning. Daniel Brophy gets to the Oregon Culinary Institute, like he always did on weekends, preparing for a class.
He unlocked the kitchen early, had no idea he was walking into, well, a trap.
And students found him later.
Yeah, they arrived later that morning and found him on the floor, unresponsive.
He'd been shot.
Twice. Once in the back, once in the chest.
And the scene itself. What did the police notice immediately?
What was notable and immediately suspicious was the lack of any struggle. No theft, no witnesses, no forced entry.
So, not a robbery gone wrong.
Police ruled that out pretty quickly. It looked targeted almost right away.
And Nancy's reaction. When she arrived at the scene.
The sources say she appeared stunned, devastated. But there were also notes that she wasn't, quote, entirely emotional. A detail that, people look back on.
Right, and she posted tributes online.
Oh yeah, quickly took to Facebook. Wrote about her love for Daniel, how she couldn't imagine life without him.
Initially, the community supported her, saw her as the grieving widow.
They did, rallied around her. But detectives, despite that public sympathy, they had questions. They started digging into the couple's background. And that's when those troubling inconsistencies started to surface.
Those inconsistencies, like breadcrumbs, leading them somewhere else entirely. What was the real turning point for the investigation?
It was sort of a 1-2 punch, really. First, uncovering those life insurance policies.
The $1.5 million.
Exactly. Especially when you put that against their really dire financial situation. That's a huge red flag. Right.
Absolutely.
But then, as they dug into Nancy's life, her writing, they rediscovered that essay.
How to Murder Your Husband.
Yeah. And suddenly, what was dismissed as fiction, it starts to look like potential premeditation, a possible blueprint.
So her own words, her fiction, became this lens to view a real crime. What about physical evidence? What really started to nail down the case against her?
Well, the evidence started mounting. A really critical piece was surveillance footage.
From where?
From near the Culinary Institute. It showed Nancy's minivan in the area right around the time of the murder.
And she said she was home?
Her alibi was that she was home all morning. So that video directly contradicted her story, raised serious, undeniable questions.
That's huge. What else did they find? It wasn't just the van, was it?
No. Further digging uncovered online purchases linked directly to Nancy.
Purchases of what?
Gun parts. Specifically, a ghost gun slide and barrel.
Explain ghost gun for people listening.
Sure. It basically refers to a firearm that's unserialized, untraceable, often assembled from parts you buy online separately, makes it incredibly hard for law enforcement to track.
And the actual murder weapon?
Never found. But investigators believed it had been dismantled, which fits, with the kind of modular parts she bought.
Okay, so let's recap. You've got a massive financial motive. You've got her lying about where she was, directly contradicted by video.
Right.
You have her buying untraceable gun parts online, parts for this type of gun used. And then you have this incredibly chilling essay just sort of hanging in the background.
It paints a pretty grim picture, doesn't it? All this circumstantial evidence starts to pile up.
Yeah, it seems like she shifted pretty quickly from grieving wife to a prime suspect in their eyes.
It certainly created a powerful narrative of intent and opportunity for the prosecution.
And then the arrest. September 2018, just over 3 months after Daniel was killed.
Caused shockwaves in their community, as you can imagine. She was charged with second-degree murder.
And she maintained her innocence.
Right from the start. And still does. The media naturally went into a frenzy once that essay title got out.
Oh, I bet. The headlines wrote themselves. Writer of How to Murder Your Husband charged with husband's murder.
Exactly. It captivated America. This bizarre, dark story of life imitating art.
And the trial finally started when?
May 2022.
So the prosecution's case. How did they lay it all out for the jury?
They built it piece by piece, argued it was meticulous planning, driven by desperation. They presented the financial motive, the debt, the insurance. They hammered on the lies about her whereabouts using that surveillance video.
Right.
And they detailed the gun part purchases, arguing it showed a clear intent to get an untraceable weapon and then dispose of it. Chilling resolve, they called it.
How did the defense respond? That sounds like a tough case to argue against.
They pushed back hard. Their main argument, it's all circumstantial. No murder weapon was ever found. No eyewitnesses saw her shoot him. No confession.
Okay.
They argued the prosecution was just building inferences. And they claimed the media coverage, especially about the essay, had created this prejudiced narrative.
Trying to paint her as a victim of circumstance.
Essentially, yeah. Caught up in a tragedy, not the cause of it. But the jury, Well, they heard all the evidence, the video, the insurance, the online trail.
And Nancy testified herself.
She did. Appeared calm, articulate, professed deep love for Daniel, said she was devastated.
But the prosecution must have challenged her.
Oh, absolutely. They honed in on the inconsistencies, especially why lie about where you were on the morning your husband was murdered if you have nothing to hide?
Good question.
Her explanations, apparently, were often vague or seemed contradictory under pressure. That likely didn't help her with the jury.
And that essay, How to Murder Your Husband, how did it actually play out in court? It wasn't direct evidence legally, was it?
That's a really important point. No, legally, the prosecution couldn't say, she wrote this, therefore she did it. It's fiction. But the judge did allow it to be discussed, not as proof of the act itself, but as relevant to her motive and her state of mind.
Ah, okay.
It showed this disturbing familiarity with the exact subject matter. It allowed prosecutors to argue it reflected a premeditated mindset, even if it was written years earlier. It definitely cast a long shadow.
So after all the testimony, weeks of trial, the jury came back, May 2022. What was the verdict?
Guilty, second-degree murder.
Her reaction?
Reports say the courtroom was silent. Nancy herself showed very little reaction, just quietly absorbed it.
And the sentence?
Life in prison. She'll be eligible for parole after 25 years.
Which means she'd be, what, 91 years old?
Exactly. It's effectively a life sentence. And the fascination with the case, life imitating art, it just continues.
What about Daniel Brophy's family? How did they react?
They expressed relief at the verdict, of course, but also just profound sadness. Grief made worse by the betrayal, They remembered him as this kind, loving man, a mentor. Life just tragically cut short.
And Nancy Crampton Brophy, is her legal fight over?
She insists she's innocent. Says the system failed her. Her appeal is ongoing.
Any chance it succeeds?
Legal experts seem to think it's unlikely. The circumstantial case was very strong. Her words, her actions, the planning. It was all quite damning.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this core question, aren't we? Did a writer of murder fiction just get too close? Did those lines between imagination and reality just completely blur for her?
It's such a tragic conclusion. She used fiction to explore these dark corners of human desire. Narratives where love and murder mix. And now, the ultimate irony, she's behind bars herself, a central character in a true crime story that shocked everyone. Her own life echoing her art in the most horrific way.
She told readers, killing a husband, it's just fiction, a plot device, something you explore on the page. But Daniel Brophy's death told a completely different story. One written not in ink, but in, reality.
And maybe that leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to mull over. What does this case really reveal about the power, maybe the danger, of imagination? And when, if ever, does exploring dark themes creatively cross some kind of line into dangerous territory?